They were following the procedure. Every step had been done before. The equipment was familiar, the goal was clear, and the people involved were among the most qualified in their field. And yet, within moments, something went wrong in a way that nobody had predicted, and the consequences reached far beyond the laboratory walls. That is the story we are examining today. Not a tale of recklessness or ignorance, but something far more unsettling. A catastrophic outcome that emerged from confidence, familiarity, and the slow erosion of caution that experience can sometimes produce. The question at the heart of this episode is deceptively simple. How does a community of trained, careful, intelligent people come to accept levels of risk that, in retrospect, seem obviously unacceptable? And what does it take, what kind of event, to force a genuine reckoning with how safety is understood? To answer that, we need to understand what researchers in high-stakes fields were actually trying to accomplish. In the mid-20th century, nuclear science was moving at a speed that felt almost incomprehensible. The physics was new, the materials were unlike anything handled before, and the institutional frameworks for managing risk were being invented in real time. The goal was knowledge. Fundamental, consequential knowledge about how matter and energy behaved at scales that had never been experimentally explored. The International Atomic Energy Agency would later define nuclear safety as the achievement of proper operating conditions, the prevention of accidents, and the mitigation of consequences when accidents do occur. That definition sounds straightforward, but in the earliest decades of nuclear research, the frameworks required to operationalize it simply did not exist in mature form. Safety was, in many cases, whatever the most experienced people in the room believed it to be. That is where confidence becomes dangerous. When an experiment is repeated successfully many times, the repetition itself starts to feel like evidence of safety. Each successful run reinforces the belief that the margins are well understood. What it actually demonstrates is only that the procedure did not fail on those particular occasions, under those particular conditions. The distinction matters enormously, and it is one that disaster tends to make brutally clear. Early successes in nuclear experimentation generated real and justified pride. Researchers were mapping territory that no human being had ever entered. They were building the foundational understanding that would eventually inform everything from energy generation to medicine. The work was difficult, the people doing it were exceptional, and the results were genuinely advancing human knowledge. That context is important. It explains, without excusing, how warning signs could be minimized. Because there were warning signs. In any complex high-energy system, anomalies appear before catastrophic failure. Equipment behaves unexpectedly. Measurements come back slightly outside the anticipated range. Procedures that were designed with one set of assumptions are applied to situations those assumptions did not fully account for. In a culture where confidence is high and the work feels important, these anomalies can be rationalized rather than investigated. They become noise rather than signal. The organizational layer of risk is often harder to see than the technical layer. A piece of equipment either works or it does not. But the organizational conditions that allow warning signs to be overlooked, the informal hierarchies, the pressure to maintain momentum, the human tendency to weight recent experience over abstract risk, these are invisible until they produce a failure that makes them visible. When the failure came, it was swift. That is characteristic of systems operating near a critical threshold. The transition from normal to catastrophic is not always gradual. In nuclear contexts particularly, the physics involved can produce consequences in fractions of a second that no human response time can address. The event itself is, in a sense, already complete before the people present fully register that it has begun. The cascade that followed extended well beyond the immediate moment. Exposure to radiation does not announce itself the way other injuries do. The damage is invisible at first, operating at a biological level that unfolds over hours, days, and weeks. People who were present during an incident might feel relatively normal initially, and only later begin to experience the effects of what their bodies had absorbed. That temporal gap between the event and its full consequences has historically made the true severity of radiation accidents difficult to communicate and difficult to process. Investigations into serious laboratory accidents have consistently revealed a layered architecture of cause. At the surface, there is the proximate event, the specific action or failure that immediately preceded the harm. But beneath that is a technical root cause, some property of the system that was not fully understood, or was understood but not adequately controlled. And beneath that, almost always, is an organizational cause. The conditions under which decisions were made, the information that was or was not shared, the culture within which risk was assessed. The ethical dimension is distinct from all of these. It asks not just what happened and why, but what obligations existed and whether they were honored. In research contexts, that includes obligations to the people conducting the work, to the institutions responsible for their safety, and to the broader public whose trust supports the enterprise of science itself. What changed after the events that forced this reckoning was not simply a list of new rules. Rules matter, but rules applied without understanding are fragile. What changed more fundamentally was a shift in how safety was conceptualized. Rather than treating safety as the absence of past accidents, the field began moving toward an understanding of safety as an active, ongoing process, one that requires continuous monitoring, honest reporting of anomalies, and the institutional courage to stop and reassess when something does not fit the expected pattern. Formal safety cultures began to develop. Independent review processes were established. The idea that the most senior or experienced person in the room was automatically the most reliable judge of acceptable risk was challenged. Checklists, protocols, and oversight mechanisms that might once have seemed like bureaucratic friction were reframed as essential tools for managing the gap between what people believe they know and what is actually true. The IAEA's definition of nuclear safety, with its emphasis on proper operating conditions and the mitigation of consequences, reflects this evolved understanding. Safety is not a state you achieve and then possess. It is something that must be maintained, monitored, and continuously earned through attention and discipline. There is something genuinely humbling about examining these events from a distance. The people involved were not careless. They were not ignorant. In many cases, they were operating at the frontier of what was known, making judgments with incomplete information under conditions that no previous generation had faced. The lesson is not that they were failures. The lesson is that expertise, intelligence, and good intentions are necessary but not sufficient conditions for safety. What is sufficient is a culture that takes warning signs seriously, that creates space for concern to be raised without penalty, that treats each anomaly as information rather than inconvenience, and that holds the protection of human life as a value that does not bend under the pressure of momentum or ambition. That cultural shift, partial, imperfect, still ongoing, is the real legacy of the accidents that forced everyone to rethink safety. Not the specific procedures that were changed, but the deeper recognition that the most dangerous moment in any high-stakes enterprise is the moment when the people involved stop asking whether they might be wrong. Science advances by confronting what it does not know. The safety frameworks built in the aftermath of these events represent that same commitment applied to the practice of science itself, an honest accounting of where confidence had outrun understanding, and a structured effort to close that gap. The question that remains open is one that every generation of researchers and engineers must answer for themselves. How do you maintain genuine vigilance when everything seems to be going well? That is not a question with a final answer. It is one that has to be asked and answered every single day. This content is for educational purposes only. Do not attempt to recreate any described experiment or procedure.